Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm honored to have my sis on. I'm going to let her introduce herself, tell people who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Hi, Bobby. Thanks so much for having me. Honored to be here today with you. I'm Eesir Kaur. I'm the Senior Vice President of Program at Rocketship Public Schools. We are a public charter network with 23 schools in 5 different regions. We're located in California, Tennessee, Wisconsin, DC, and most recently, Texas. And honored, privileged to do this work. I would say I do this work because, and Bobby, you might have heard me say this before. I do this work because when I was a teacher, I saw myself represented in my students and the hopes and dreams and potential that they walk in with into their classrooms. And now I would say in this capacity, also see myself in our teachers and leaders who are hungry, driven, dedicated to the work, but likely need a lot of coaching, support, development, love, nurturing. So that's really kind of in a nutshell why I do what I do.
I love it. I love that, one, that's the space you're in, because folks who may be listening for the first time, I always tell folks who've been listening that I started in Camden, New Jersey. I started at a little old school in Camden, and in that school that I say I started in, I taught next to you, right next door. I think you had eighth and I had seventh. Was that what it was?
No, it was the other way around. I had seventh and you had eighth. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I had seventh the year before and moved up with that same group of kids. I still talk to them and I apologize all the time. I'm like, man, golly, if I could go back.
I think there was a lot. There were a lot of lessons I think we learned, but I think the relationships that I forged, the critical consciousness that I walked away with, I think really helped fuel the pathway that I'm on. And so I'm thankful for that experience. And really there is, for folks who are listening, like there's really no place like Camden. It is, for me, very special because I think it felt like the school that we were teaching in was at that time a bastion of hope amidst so much generational poverty, trauma, disenfranchisement, illiteracy rates. And I would be remiss if I didn't name that it has since closed. And, I think it begs the question, why? And where did we go wrong? And how do you create lasting change?
Which for me is the crux of, wanting you to share space with me this evening as we kind of talk through that. The work that you do in helping to fuel and build and create learning spaces for our babies. For me, school was something that I survived, but I didn't necessarily thrive in. And there are a lot of experiences that I had that I believe fuel me to be a better educator today. In the same way you talk about the critical consciousness that we both embarked in our experience in Camden, when we talk about schooling, I don't think people get into the emotional context of what it means to be Black or brown and in a school in these yet to be United States of America. Help our listeners understand from your perspective, what was school like for you? What was your experience like?
Very different than yours. I loved school. Like I couldn't wait to be in school. And it was the entire, I would say, ethos around school, right? Like it was the entire culture, the feeling that I got the minute I stepped on campus. It's wild because I know each and every single one of my teachers. I still know their names.
Mm,
Um, I remember one of my early experiences in kindergarten being I showed up and Miss Mintz, my kindergarten teacher, offered me snacks. And I was like, whoa, snacks. Like, this is wild. I didn't know you got snacks at school.
yeah.
And then we read books. There was a pet turtle, and I was encouraged to participate. I also I'm multilingual, so I speak Punjabi. That was my first language. And when I arrived at school, English felt glamorous. Like there was, the
Mm,
tinkering of the syllables and the noises, and it felt like I was collecting little gems. Um, but it was because my ESL teacher, Miss Farage, Mercedes Farage, she was so deliberate in how she developed that love of language in me. I
mm,
remember the first time I saw squash was with her in kindergarten. So she brought all these different varieties of squash, and she asked us to hold them and cut them and taste them, and it was it was experiential learning,
yeah.
which I think now too often is only afforded to a different subset of students, right? Like
Yeah.
you can read about it in a black and white copy of a book
Mm-hmm.
that I may or may not take back from you, but you can't really experience what
Yeah.
the different varieties of squash are. It's two very
Yeah.
different experiences, right? And so I fell in love. I fell in love with learning very, very early on. And I could not, I mean, I am forever indebted to all of my teachers because I think they saw how much I loved learning and they
Yeah.
poured into me. And for me, it created a prosperous cycle, right? Like they poured into me, I loved learning, and so on and so forth. And there goes the cycle.
Yeah.
But that's the same disinvestment that happens towards other students, right? A student
Yep.
who arrives to school with perhaps more apathy or reluctance. And so teachers pull back and disengage. And so if student further disengages, and that too becomes a type of cycle that perpetuates itself.
Yeah. Think about, what you're saying with regard to your experience. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention folks like Miss Capers, my fifth grade teacher, who I actually got the chance to see last week and tell her that she is the reason I'm in education. So shout out to Miss Capers. Miss Parham, my third grade teacher. Mr. Tyler, black male educator down the block who taught me how to, make sure my tie was straight, when I was you know, in middle school, and things like that. You know, there were, I'm going to say, spots where it was like an oasis in an otherwise what I'd say dry area. And it wasn't that I feel
Mm,
like the teachers where I was at were just malicious. I don't think that at all.
mm,
I think they were genuinely
mm,
nice people in their own right. I do think that
mhm,
they didn't really see me.
mm,
I do think that there wasn't a particular care for or love or intention around what it means to teach a demographic different than their own, a culture different than their own,
mhm,
a set of beliefs, norms, traditions, values different than their own. And
mhm,
so and listen, you would never know on the surface that I didn't thrive in school. Like I
mhm,
was an honor roll student. Like,
mhm.
pretty much all through high school and whatnot. So I did excel, but I did it because I knew my parents would whip my behind if I did not do what I was supposed to do. You know what I mean? Um,
Oh,
which
all
which
too
brings me
well.
to asking you what I know you mentioned your kindergarten teacher. And I know you mentioned like I'm hearing that there were, like you said, the experiential learning, a care, an intention. If you could like make it plain for folks who are listening, what made it so that you began to thrive and want to be there and had this love of it? What fostered that for you?
It was it was every single adult that poured into me. I mean, I
Mm.
could list endless adults in that building
Mhm.
who knew me
Mhm.
by name, knew the things that I loved and cared about. I remember Mr. Sigvalson, my second grade teacher. He opened his classroom door and he had me stand and look out at the horizon. And
Yeah.
there was a hill. And at the
Yeah.
top of that hill, very far off in the distance, there was the local university, which is now known as Cal State East Bay.
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, put your sights up there." And I was in second grade, and
Mm.
he made me look, and he said, "That is where you are destined to go." And never mind Cal State East Bay. It was the visual attention of like, here's the altitude that I expect you to reach,
Yeah.
that I deposit this belief in you that you will reach, right? And then I will back it with every ounce of my being, right? I will teach you
Mm.
so that you can scale this summit. Um and I think that was really the thing that became catalytic in my life. It was every step of the way there was not just one person. So it was not like, yeah, I think you described it so eloquently, in oasis in otherwise really quite dry and barren land. For me, I I felt like I was in a lush forest for all of my formative career. And I
Mm.
will say the difference for me, and really what, you open the conversation with like, why do you do this work? Why do you do what you do? The difference for me came much later, right? So I after high school, I was accepted to Harvard, and it was a no-brainer for me. I was like, of course I'm going to go. Like,
Mm.
if Harvard calls, you answer.
Mhm.
That's not a
Mhm.
question, right? And I remember going to their freshman day, which is like, you go, you tour the campus, you decide if it's a good fit for you. Good fit for
Mhm.
me, right? I was
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, like of course I'm going to come here.
Yeah.
And so that was my first um experience around, there there are some folks in the country whose names were written on the walls even before they were born. They were destined to be there.
Mm.
I just stumbled there, right? And that experience felt wildly inequitable. And I
Mm.
talked often, right, about having a seat at the table. And I found myself at the table in the halls
Mhm.
of Harvard, but I
Mhm.
lost my voice in the process. And
Mhm.
I think as I started to unpack, because so much of my formative career had, like, my entire identity was I am smart. That's what I came to believe about myself. I am smart. And that identity unraveled so quickly,
Mm. At Harvard?
as at Harvard, like instantaneously. I
Wow.
I took, initial placement tests and was placed in remedial classes, and it was a shock to my system because, remember, my whole life I had thought I'm smart. That's just who I am. I got straight A's. I got a 5.0 GPA in high school. Like, and who is this person who's now in remedial courses, who's struggling, who doesn't know how to navigate the stacks, who can't take notes, who can't really comprehend what's happening in this lecture, who can't then go and apply these learnings in the lab? And I wasn't at a deficit from a single place, right? I had some intellectual deficits, I had social deficits, I had economic deficits, right? And they started to compound really
Mm.
quickly for me. And I've and this is where I'm like, my faith in a supreme being is unwavering, because amidst really a frightening experience. I had um, an advisor who kind of pulled me out of the throes of that. And
Mm,
she helped me navigate what it meant to be there and
yeah,
what then it would take from me to be successful. And that experience then informed what I really wanted to do with my life, which
yeah.
is not just a seat, but a voice at the table.
I think that distinction is I don't think people get how large that gap can be for folks is to not just be seated, but to be heard, not
Hmm.
to just be seated, but given grace and space to actually make a decision about what happens at said table. Not for the photo op that includes us so that you look good, but an actual respect level that honors the genius that is embedded in us. That piece is, I mean, major. Considering, like you said, to go from a background of no, this was fueled in me. We looked at over a hill. I saw the college. I knew I was supposed to be here, and then to get there and then be like, oh my gosh, who is this person that I'm looking at in the mirror, and why is this happening to me, and all of that.
Hmm.
I appreciate you sharing that, and I hope folks, hear how different things can be uh, if we're not intentional about pouring into understanding and navigating those things. Which brings me to the major crux of our conversation. I want a freedom dream with you in the time we have remaining. I want to dream about what it would look like from K to 12 and even in higher ed, right? I would love to expand it a little bit and to talk about what it looks like to build a school that actually loves and serves and nourishes Black and brown folk. What does that mean? What does that look like? Particularly, right? Like, let me just be real. 80% of our teaching force is white women. Am I saying white women are bad? No. I'm saying that there are cultural barriers. I'm saying that there are things that may affect us. So, like in that reality, because I don't want a freedom dream outside of you know what we have to do. Like, how do we make that actionable? So, if you had a freedom dream, what do you think is the number one essential ingredient in order to start building a school that loves and serves us?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think a profound one. And I'll maybe share a little bit about Teach for America. I am a former Teach for America core member.
Yeah,
And I think it's because in answering this question, right, like what freedom dream with me and build this school, you also necessarily have to answer what is this school not? And it is not galvanizing a well intentioned but woefully underprepared group of college students to teach in the most deserving and historically most disenfranchised schools and populations, right?
yeah,
So when I freedom dream with you, I envision a world in which the educators are obsessed with their craft, obsessed with what does it mean to ensure that the students who walk through my door are literate. I don't care about them passing a test. That will happen. That is an expected, a given because of how
yeah,
I teach. But really, I want them to fall in love with literature. I want them to
yeah,
write. I want them to dream. I want them to advocate. I want them to give the next TED talk, right?
yeah.
And that's the type of school I would want to create. I don't know if you remember this, but we taught like you open. We taught
Yeah,
right next door to
yeah,
each other. And I was teaching a lesson and we had I think like opposite lunches or however, prep time shook out.
yeah,
And so I was still teaching and you were on prep and you walked past my room and then you backpedaled and you came in and you started to co-teach. And that'll never leave my mind, right?
Mm.
Because in that moment, I think what it signaled, certainly to me, but I think more importantly to my students, was they are not just my students, they are our students,
Yeah.
that their brilliance is worth investing in. And we won't stop until you understand, right?
Yeah.
And that requires love, dedication, patience, right? It requires so much. And a community fuels one another, right?
Mm.
So the next time I had time, I came into your classroom.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't seen from you what it means to teach in community, to uphold our kids as all of our kids, right? Like, this is not a third grader, this is not a seventh grader. These are our kids, and
Yeah.
we are helping them unleash the potential from within. And it is a collective effort, right? And so that's the school I want to work in. I think that, and want to build and create. That's the type of organization that I feel like I am a part of. Where,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and I don't. I'll say this: I think there are plenty of things that we need to fix, and I think there are models that are interesting to look at. Like, if you look at the Finnish education system, the looping up with kids
Yeah.
was an important, I think, predictor of student achievement. But what I thought was fascinating about it is, if you start with a kindergartner and you loop up with them in first and second and third and fourth and fifth, you're in a relationship with them, with their
Yeah.
family, right? Their family's dreams and hopes become your dreams and hopes, right? You know more about the student, you care more, right?
Yeah.
And I thought I thought it was a fascinating approach because it forces that level of understanding, collaboration, care, nurturing, right? And I think too often our schools are transactional, right? They're You show up, you drop off your kid, I teach them this thing, and then they go home, right? And it is
Yeah.
of no consequence if they actually learned it, if they care about it, if they want to discuss it later. Like, I have a curriculum, I'm following the script, and damned be everything else. And
Yeah.
I think something radical needs to happen to help us shift and recenter the narrative around what does it mean to love teaching and learning.
Yeah. The piece there about education being transactional, like, I think that is the that is the biggest piece, I think, that is affecting so much. Because if it's transactional, then there's a value ascribed to something, right? And the value, what is the thing that we value in education? Well, it certainly isn't the students. Uh, and I'm saying that as a macro level, right? There are exceptions to the rule wherever, and so I'm not saying every school, but by and large, we're seeing it, right? You also said something very key too, and that is, like, I'm going to obsess over this, and you're going to get it. Like, there's no opt out. There's, like, we are going to do this thing together.
Mhm.
I love that piece because it sits amongst a backdrop where on social media we see teachers explaining how far behind our babies are. And it has seemed to me, from my perspective, it has seemed to cross a line for me,
Hmm.
because it seems like amidst this transactional understanding of education that seeks to put blame somewhere for the results not being there, because that's the other part of transaction, there has to be a result. If we're trying to blame somebody, And then the blame is placed on teachers. Teachers are now rebelling against that and saying, it isn't us. Look at y'all, parents. Look at these babies who are coming to us and can't read. You can't read for 15 minutes a day. You can't do. So they're seeking to get the pressure, the heat off them that they naturally feel. And for me, in there, we're missing a sacred piece of education, a sacred piece of what it means to be an educator. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to make any excuses. I'm not going to back out of this hard challenge. With me, you are going to grow. With me, you're going to learn. With me, we're going to see your greatest potential, because I won't accept anything else. And I wish that was something that we could just mass produce in education.
Totally, because it's a culture that you create, right? And underpinning it is you have to have the expertise, right? So it's not just the belief that you will get there, right? Because, what is that? Students of color are disproportionately asked to be resilient, as opposed to given the tools and strategies to identify how to effectively tackle a challenge, right? And so it's easy as an educator to give empty platitudes. And we see this often, right? So a kid is struggling to read, and the educator might say, "You've got it. You don't got it. Let's start there," right? And that's okay. And here is the code to understand the English alphabet, the language, what it means, right? And that requires so much deliberate practice as an educator, right? And it requires me to be a good steward of reading instruction, right? So, because, you have kids, I have kids, right? And imagine if our kids came home to us and they said, "Mom or Dad, I don't understand this concept." How much time would you spend bemoaning to your wife, "Our son doesn't understand this thing"? An hour? 2? A day? A week? A year? How long would it take before you said, "You know what? I'm going to roll up my sleeves. And if I don't understand how to do it, I'm going to go figure it out. And then I'm going to teach my son. And if he doesn't understand it the first time, then I'm going to try again. And I'm going to try a different way. And if he doesn't understand the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, or the 17th, or, the 107th time, I'm going to keep going.
I'm going to keep doing it."
That's what you would do for your kid. That's what I would do for my kid, right?
100%.
And that is the bar that all of our kids deserve for us to hold. Because when a student walks into our classrooms, into our schools, there are two, I think, core principles that, I would liken to the Hippocratic Oath. Parents entrust you, families entrust you with the most important people in their lives. And students trust that you are making excellent use of their time. Anything that falls short of those two beliefs and your actions in alignment of that, I think, are a violation of why families and kids choose to come to your classroom and choose to learn, right? And so I think it is really, really, because it is so easy. And I think it cheapens the conversation to say, "Well, this thing isn't right." Yeah, there are lots of things that are outside of my locus of control. Many, many things. But what is in my locus of control? What can I do? What resolve can I have? How can I learn to be a better educator? How do I find that moment and say, "I'm going to go co-teach with this teacher because I understand what's at stake," right? That's what's in our locus of control. And how do we build a community that values and puts education on the pedestal that it rightly deserves to be on?
I always say that community happens when I make your problem my problem. When we can get to a point of personalizing it, I think we'll be better off. Where I think what you're hitting for us is that in this transactional understanding of education, humanity is lost. Like we don't have proximity to families anymore. We don't understand the stories that are behind whether or not this kid gets X grade in this class, whether they really understand this concept, whether they develop mastery. We don't get the ramifications of whether or not this kid can read on grade level or beyond. We don't get that. And
Hmm.
in the same breath, if it were our kid, we would move heaven and earth to ensure that that baby could read. We would break out all the stops. So I
There,
guess the question then is, why not us? Why can't we do that in our locus of control today? Like, why is it a freedom dream exercise between you and I and not a reality that we live? Because we can do that, what you're talking about.
yeah, I mean, I think there are people out there who are listening,
Hmm.
and it is, I think it's the collective genius that will enable this larger movement, right? And
Yeah.
maybe we do it together, or maybe it's how you change mindsets and behaviors of the people around you, right?
Mm,
Because I so loved the work that we did in Camden because of the people that I was surrounded with.
absolutely.
Everyone was so committed to the community that we were serving and so committed to understanding the context of the city, of the task at hand, and
Yeah.
this relentless pursuit of what was possible, right?
Mm,
And so, maybe if you're listening, maybe you're the only one in your school who thinks I should be the best at what I do.
mm-hmm.
But that's contagious, right? When I become the best at something, I want you to join me in that
Yeah.
pursuit. I
Yeah.
welcome the opportunity for us to tussle on ideas, right? Like, let's have conversations about how kids read. Teach me how to teach a struggling reader how to read. I want to learn, right? Because that is really how I think we can move the needle on instruction. I mean, it truly really does take a community, right? A village
Yeah.
to raise a single child. And we have, I think, in our ecosystem, the power to be able to do that. And
Yeah.
and I I think an incredibly important part of that is our partnership with families, right? Because
Yeah.
going back to like if your son came home or your daughter came home and said, I didn't understand this concept that my teacher taught at school, you have the wherewithal to call the teacher, to have a relationship with the teacher and say, hey, help me understand what happened in school today. Give me the tools, the resources so I can support my kids at home. But
Yeah.
how many of our families feel like schools are exclusionary spaces
That part.
where they never belonged, where
Yeah.
they don't speak the language, where the power dynamics are fundamentally tilted, right?
Yeah.
And how do we break down those barriers and say, we are equal partners in this?
Mm,
There's probably no person on the planet who cares as much about a child's learning and development as much as their mom or dad,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so how dare we exclude them from the conversation? How is
Yeah.
that a reality? How is that a possibility?
For those who, um, and I want people to sit with that. How is that a possibility? And so I'm gonna stop us here. But I want folks to be able to get in touch with your brilliance, um, who you are, what you do, and connect with you. How can folks get in touch with you, connect with you, anything you got going on, or any ways they can support? Feel free to share those.
Yeah, maybe before we close out, because these are heavy topics,
Yeah.
and I and to keep us going,
Hmm.
I there's what's a moment of levity in in your week,
That's good.
what's a moment that sticks out and resonates and gives you hope? Like give me that.
I on the school leader side, I frequently walk into what I'm going to term the emotional vomit of the building. When I say that, I mean I walk in and people just dump the stuff that they're struggling with and then expect you to figure it out for them, right? It just happens. And I mean at all levels, students, staff, it just happens. But two separate times this week, a teacher came to me and said, I don't know how we get this far without how you like love and serve us. Like, I don't know how we do this without you. It's great to hear. And then two, seeing my babies, because that's what I call them, seeing my babies walk into school with all that I know that they carry, and seeing one of my babies who, I mean, he can tear some stuff up, but he came straight to me and said, Mr. Morgan, I got honor roll. Big smile on his face. This kid who has been adverse to school came to me to share. He's like, yeah, he's like, that honor roll ceremony, I'm going to be in that joint, right? I said, yes. Yes, you are. For me, it makes all the work worth it. That smile, and the excitement to share that news.
That's beautiful. You should have that student on your podcast.
I think I will.
That that journey of like to portray, this facade of like I'm big and bad, but also like I really am geeked out over being on the honor roll. That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. That's really great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can get in touch with me via email. It's ekaur@rsed.org. You can also check out our website, rocketshippublicschools.org. We do excellent work and intend to continue to serve our students and families. I will say that a key, I would say, difference in how we approach this work is the deep partnership with families, personalized learning, and engagement. So for those of you who are listening, check us out. If you're interested, explore our website, come tour one of our schools. And Bobby, I have to say, it's been over a decade now that you and I have known each other, and I'm honored to have shared space with you this evening, to be in community, discourse, dialogue, because it really is, it is beautiful nourishment for the mind and soul, and the really kind of the wind beneath my wings. And I'm glad to know that we are continuing to do great work from coast to coast.
Absolutely. Please reach out to my sis. She is brilliant. She is thoughtful. She's a whole human out here with layers and dimensions, and I truly appreciate her for sharing space with us. And this is one of those conversations I'm going to take with me, y'all, that impact my very soul, and I hope it does that for you. So thank you for sharing space with me, sis.
Thank you. Thanks, Bobby. The pleasure was all mine.